We'll start with a very brief history of cataloging and classification. I'm Dr. Jennifer Crispin. Librarians have been cataloging and classifying documents since the beginning of the written word. According to the Encyclopedia of Library History, the first known catalog was produced around 2000 BC, written in Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets. Historians and library researchers believe the first set of codes for cataloging were used in the library at Nineveh, but they have not yet found the list of rules for those codes. Works at this time were produced on tablets or scrolls. It would be centuries before the development of books as we know them. In cataloging terms, a book is known as a monograph. As college students, you've created at least one bibliography or list of references using bibliographic data. In the early days of libraries, bibliographies and catalogs were the same thing. Some catalogs consisted of long lists of bibliographic information. One famous one is Baghdad bookseller Ibn al-Nadim's Kitab al-Fihrist, the Book of the List. In Western Europe, bibliographies were mostly lists of monastic manuscripts. The first known European lists that allowed readers to distinguish among different versions of a work were made in 1370 and 1461 for libraries at the University of Prague, Charles University. After the 16th century invention of the printing press made it easier to make multiple copies of a work available, it took institutions decades to begin making printed catalogs of the works they held. A library's collection of monographs and other materials is referred to as its holdings. Library historians agree that the first printed catalog was for the library at the University of Leiden in 1595. This is the title page for a printed catalog. Librarians were experimenting with various ways to arrange works. Remember, at this time, libraries were often not open to the public, and retrieving a work from a library usually meant having a library worker find the item for you. In the 16th and 17th centuries, catalogs were often organized by classes, theology, medicine, philosophy, history, etc., and further divided by size. Folio, a sheet folded in half; quarto, a sheet folded into half twice; and octavo, a sheet folded into half 3 times. The first edition of Thomas James' Catalogue of the Bodleian Library is one example of this kind of catalog. James was the first librarian of the Bodleian, and his ideas about which works should be made available through catalogs were interesting, to say the least. I'll address some of those ideas in a future lecture. Later, catalogs were arranged more or less alphabetically. Quote, "They must be called more or less alphabetical because not all headings were derived from titles or authors' names. Some books lacking the name of a personal author were entered under some sort of a subject heading, usually derived from the title, while others were found under form headings, such as councils for acts of church councils, laws for compilations of statutes, and almanacs for calendars and almanacs. Often these terms were set up in Latin. Almost without exception, there is only one entry per book." You can imagine how hard it would be to find a book in that kind of catalog, especially with very few rules governing the assignment of these categories. Germans developed cataloging rules in the 1800s based on bibliographies from the 1700s onwards. This system included very complex rules for filing that remained in place for much of Central and Eastern Europe until the 1960s. In the 1960s, catalogers at the International Conference on Cataloging Principles tried to work toward internationally consistent cataloging, despite the sometimes wildly divergent practices in places like Japan, Italy, and the Soviet Union. Representatives from many countries, with the exception of Japan, agreed to work from the same set of principles, sometimes known as the Paris Principles. Throughout this class, we will learn about people who contributed to the development of the organization of information. Charles Ami Cutter made significant contributions to cataloging with his article listing and describing various types of catalogs used throughout history. This article, published in 1876, also included the first edition of his Rules for a Printed Dictionary Catalog. Not only did this list of rules establish the interfiling many of us remember from our days using card catalogs, it also gave reasons for Cutter's various rules. Cutter's Rules for a Dictionary Catalog. 1. To enable a person to find a book of which either the author, the title, the subject or the category is known. 2. To show what the library has by a given author on a given subject in a given kind of literature. And 3. To assist in the choice of a book, as to its edition, bibliographically, and as to its character, literary or topical. The Library of Congress began making catalog cards available to other libraries starting in 1901. This helped librarians accept LC rules based on Cutter's third edition. The library sent out cards and also collected cards from participating libraries, helping to create a more comprehensive union catalog than libraries had been able to accomplish in the past. Think about how helpful it is to know what holdings another library has. If you've ever used interlibrary loan, you've benefited from a union catalog. It would be nearly impossible for participating libraries to keep physical cards from all of the other participating libraries. So in the 1940s, the Library of Congress began using a photolithographic process to compile the cards. The library switched to microfiche in the 1980s. As machines and automation appeared on the library technology horizon, librarians saw a need for a machine-readable format for bibliographic records. Henriette Avram of the Library of Congress was a chief developer and proponent of machine-readable cataloging called MARC, developed between 1965 and 1967. This is still the format used to communicate bibliographic data. By the end of this class, you will be able to create and read bibliographic records in MARC format.